HTML. So today we'll continue with our CSS, and today we'll be looking at selectors, CSS selectors. Okay, selectors are used to find or select HTML element based on their element name, ID, class attributes, and more. So the H1 here is an element selector, CSS selector. So it's an element, we have selected it. Okay, there are more ways of selecting a CSS, different types of CSS selector, but we're going to look at these three basic common ones which we use, most people use. So let's say element selector. What is element selector? An element selector select element based on their name. So basically it's select element based on their name, the tag name, the element's name, the attribute. Remember, tag is the same as element in this our case. So they select based on the tag name and the element's name. Okay, let's go to our code. I have some sample code here which I have linked this. Okay, I'm just going to empty the whole code. Let's start a new code here. HTML. So let's put a paragraph tag in the body. So we create our new file, we save it .css. So remember to save it with .css extension, your new file. So this is where we'll be writing our CSS code. Remember, I told you we will purposely based on the external one. That's the easiest one to edit. When you're writing a bulk or a linked code, let's say a full website, using the external one is better. So we'll be using that one, create a new file, save it .css, any name .css. So basically we are looking at the element selector, which says we select with element name, so the p tag. So when you open our code, we have our p tag here. So we want to edit this, we want to change the color to red. But first, let's open it in our browser and see how it looks. You see the color is black and it's small. So I want to increase the font size to 50 pixels and we change the color to red. So how do we do this? We go to our CSS file, we select our p tag. Remember the syntax of CSS. So we put our color will be red. We put our font size. Remember our font size, you said 50 pixels. We save it, but don't forget to link it. In an external distance, you are supposed to link it. We talked about this in the last tutorial. So you bring your link and the href, you type the file name with the extension. So you remember to link it with the link tag. The href, you type the file name. So we select our p tag. So let's open our browser, refresh our browser. You see the size has increased and the color has changed to red. So this is how you do element selectors. So this is basically the element selector. We have selected the p tag. Yeah. So anything we write within this p tag, it's going to affect anything in the p tag on the HTML file. So our next listing is the ID selector. ID selector uses the ID attribute of an HTML element to select specific element. An ID of an element should be unique within a page. So the ID selector is used to select one unique element. So basically the ID selector is used to edit unique Let's say you want to edit a header, you want to edit a particular portion, your about page, your contact me. So you use the ID selector. It should be a unique name in your code. So let's see a practical example. So we say to select an element with a specific ID, write a hash character. So let's see an example. So let's open our div tag. We looked at this in our previous tutorials. So let's see. So you have your chance to type anything you want. So let's come inside our tag. You see our tag, the first tag, the opening tag. We type ID. ID is equal to quotation mark. So you give it ID name you want. So let's say my underscore ID. So let's save it. So we have given it an ID name. Remember the ID name is typed within the element opening tag. Element opening tag. We have our div opening tag, closing tag. So we have our ID. So our ID name is my ID. So we have given our ID. So here they are saying to select an element with a specific ID, write a hash character, and followed by the ID element. So here we are going to edit the ID. So we have our hash. So we type our ID name and we open our curly brackets. So basically this is how you select an ID. You use a hash symbol. This one was, let me remove it. Basically this is how you select an ID. This is how you select an ID with an hash sign. So it will only affect this thing. Anything I type between the ID div tag here, it only affect it. So let's save it. Let's save our ID. Let's give our ID, let's say color, let's say blue, font size, let's say 40 pixels. Let's save it. Let's open our browser. Let's refresh. So we can see we are looking at the ID selector in CSS. Hope this will be fun. So this is how we do ID selectors. You give the ID name in your code, your HTML code, which we did my ID. And when you go to your CSS file, you use the hash before the ID name, the name you give it. Remember the ID name has to be unique. So you give it hash. You start with the hash and you follow by the ID name. So anything you type within this place will affect the ID name. Will affect the ID. Whatever is between here will affect it. So our next listing is class selectors. But remember, an ID name cannot start with a number. An ID name cannot start with a number. So let's look at the class selectors. The class selector selects element with a specific class attribute. Like the name goes, class attribute. To select an element with a specific class attribute, write a period. Normally we call it full stop, but in programming they say period. A period character followed by the name of the class. You can also specify that only specific elements. So let's concentrate on the class here. So you know, in class we can have a lot of people, unlike the ID, which is very unique. Like for example, everybody has a unique ID. You can't see an ID number belonging to 2 or 3 people. So everybody has a unique ID. But in class we have various members belonging to the same class. So let's see how class selectors work. So we create another, let's say, paragraph here, or let's say h1. Let's create an h1 tag here. So within our h1 we have let's save it. So remember to select an element with a specific class, write a period followed by the class name. So here we give our class is written the same like the ID name. So you write it within the opening tag of the element you want to edit. So let's type our class here. So what will be our class name? Let's say my okay, my is okay. So you see where we have written it in the beginning or the opening tag of our element. We want to edit this h1 element. So let's save it. So as usual, we're going to change the color and increase the font size. So let's go to our CSS file. This was the ID. So we come below the ID. We put our period. Class, remember class, we select class with period. And you type our class name, my. You open our curly brackets. So our color, let's say our color here will be green. Our font size will be 60 pixels. So remember, we start with a period here, a full stop. Let's say full stop period, and we have our class name here, my. So when editing, your class name has to correspond with what you are editing. So let's save our file, open our browser, refresh our browser. So we see this is a sample of a class selector. We can have many classes with the same name. So this is how we select a class. You can either select image, any sort of thing you want to select, but remember the class has to correspond. My. And when editing a class, we start with the period. When editing an ID, we start with the hash. So basically, these are the selectors we will be using on our way. And there's an important thing here. You see, you can also specify that only specific HTML elements should be affected by a class. So let's come and look at this scenario. Assuming this, let's assume this wasn't part of our class. So now we are removing our ID. So we have removed our ID. So we have basically what we have done here is we have removed the ID and we have shift the h1 tag within the def tag. So this is now the beginning of the def tag, the ending of the def tag. So the h1 tag is between it. So what we are looking at, the scenario is you can select a specific HTML element should be affected. You can also specify the HTML, specific HTML that should be affected. So basically we want to specify that only this h1 should be affected, but not whatever is inside. Let's say not our p tag. Let's say this one is in the P tag. So we are specifying that only H1 should be affected, not the P tag. So let's save it. We haven't done any specification. Let's open the browser and see how this look like. So basically this is what we have. Remember, this one is H1 tag, that's why you see it very bold. So let's go and work on our editing. So we are going to select specifically the P tag should be affected. A P tag should be affected. So we bring our class name. So let's say color. So let's save it. Let's refresh. Are we writing the syntax wrong? Yeah, I think so. Remember to save your code. If you don't save it, your code won't run. Remember to save it. If you don't save it, your code won't run. Remember to save it. If you don't save it, your code won't run. So let's refresh. Now we can see our P tag is affected. Only this one is affected. It has changed to red. So what we are going to do is we are going to increase the front size so that we can see it very well. So let's say 40 pixels. So let's open our browser, refresh our browser. So you see now it's very big. So all these other things won't be affected, but they are all in the same class. They are all in the same class. P and H is in the same class, but only P will be affected because we've specified that only P should be affected here. So basically that's the selectors we'll be using. So there is another thing we are going to look about: grouping of selectors. This one is about cleaning your code. Your code should be neat and readable. So this grouping of selectors, if we have elements with the same style definition, it will be better to group the selectors to minimize the code. To group selectors, we separate each selector with a comma. So let's have an example here. So inside this, I'm now going to remove this. I'm removing the def. So we have our H1 tag here. So let's copy that one. Let's paste it like 5 times. Let's change this to H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. Do the same thing here. So we are going to edit all these elements. Let's assume maybe they are on very different pages. We want to edit all these elements. So simple, we are going to use the element selector. We can do H1, open bracket, and say color red. We save it. We come down. We open H2. You say color. You say color red. We open H3. This one will work alright, but our code will be too bulky. Just for small editing like this, our code will be too bulky. So let's say color red. Doing this for all the distance, it will work alright. We have it here, it will work alright, but our code will be too bulky. So what we meant by grouping of, if we have elements with the same style definition, it would be better to group the selectors. So what we meant by grouping the selectors is, let's see, so we have, it all has the same definition. It all has to be color red, all the headings. Okay, so for it to all be color red, we can group them by separating it, the selectors, with commas. Let's save it. We are separating it with commas. You name all the selectors because it has the same definition, style definition. So we group them together like this. We separate them with comma. Open your browser. Let's refresh and see our result. You can see all the 6 headings have changed to color red. So this is what we call grouping of selectors. So let's look at our final one, comments. Basically, comments are used to explain your code, and they are very useful. One day if you come back to edit the code, they are very useful. Or if somebody comes to continue with the code, assuming you are working for a company and after some time you leave, another engineer, developer comes to continue, if your code is not commented, they find it very difficult. So how do we comment? Remember, comments are not read by the browsers. Browsers ignore comments. So whatever you type there, it will never show on the browser. A CSS comment starts with just a slash, then star, then and ends with star then slash. So let's see a comment. So assuming, let's see, we have this color. Let's see, background color. Background, let's see, red. Let's see, wait. No background, let's see, blue. Let's save it. Open our browser. Let's refresh our browser. You see our background is blue. So let's put a comment. Let's make this a comment and see what will happen. So we say slash star. You see it has changed to plain already. So let's end the comment. Star slash. See the comment has ended. The whole of yes. So let's save it. Let's open our browser. Let's refresh. You see the background is gone. It's because we have commented it. So the background is gone. So this is how you comment in CSS. So I hope that will make up for today's tutorial. Till the next time we meet, we will look at backgrounds, border and other things in CSS before we start developing our